All right. This is Dr. B, and it's a Sunday afternoon. I'm sweating in my office because it's hot and my air conditioning is broke, but that's all right. I have a guest that is joining the show today. Kuali, I want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your background, your education, really anything that you would like to share.
Sure, thank you. Hi, my name is Kuali. Um, well, my background is pretty much, well, aside from like accounting, um, I've been working with the community for several years and as a community professor, as an artist on social media, and now I'm trying to work towards filmmaking right now. I've just started this year, and well, I used to do a lot more organizing with fundraising for communities. When time permits, I still do that. Of course, I try to provide gather resources for communities, whatever kind of resources they may need. But that's just kind of a little small scope of what I do.
Excellent. And so you are um, involved heavily in social media, and you've done very well for yourself as a content creator. Can you tell us a little bit about the type of content that you enjoy creating? And I know that there are a lot of different, styles, obviously, of content creation, and there's so many different aspects to social media, but your issues that you're really big on are indigenous issues, indigenous rights, and maybe you can kind of expand on that and tell us a little bit about what inspired you to put yourself out there on social media, which I know isn't always an easy thing to do.
Right, right. Thank you for having me and sharing your platform, Bernard. And what inspired me is around the time, I think a little bit before Black Lives Matter was when Bernie Sanders was out there, and he was talking about a lot of things, but one of the things he briefly mentioned was about farm workers and migrants and the issues that we were starting to really see through social media come out with that community. I was just new to all of it, but it really struck a chord, with me, and it intrigued me. And so, I mean, I figured if this white tea man can show so much interest and say such powerful words about this my community, I was just confused why other people weren't, especially like my own community, the brown community, and then other communities like the black community or the native community in general, and our allies. Like, it was it was like only this man speaking truth, and he what he said was that these people, they are original descendants of the native people, and he said if anything, the US should be giving them reparations and not criminalizing them. So when he said that, and obviously that's where it kind of inspired me. But before that, it inspired my political work. But before that, I was inspired by a teacher to look into my roots and everything in high school.
Yeah,
But so,
why don't you tell us a little bit about that? I'm really curious in
sure.
terms of, yeah, just how you started to reconnect with your indigenous ancestry.
Yeah, my story is similar to many Mexicans and just brown people in general. Our families don't really tell us much, is the way it goes. They have this trauma where they don't speak about any of that. And the more I researched into it lately, it makes sense because there was actually this like silencing of Mexicans. The government was saying that we're gonna leave the past in the past, and they would like put this in movies. They would put this all over and say like a sort of a brainwashing the public, saying the past is the past. We're gonna move forward. We're gonna be one nation. We're gonna be Mexican, mestizos, and there's gonna be equality for all. And from going here forward, it's just your fault if you don't make it. No one's doing this to you. Like, it was just this brainwashing. The more I read into it, yet they didn't offer reparations or any help or any assistance. Right? They just told the people, you got to get over it and don't. That's in the leave it in the past. So when we try to talk about it with our families, they literally don't talk about it because they left it in the past, and it for generations. So it wasn't like one generation; it's been many generations already. So we had to like get clues, and one of my clues was in high school, and the teacher. Thank goodness for Chicano teachers everywhere, because without them, I don't know. She was definitely one of those, and she just pulled me aside one day, and it was interestingly a day that we were watching the, how do you say, the Holocaust. The learning, it was a history class, and we were learning about the Holocaust, and she put the film on, the footage about, about the Holocaust, and it was getting really graphic, and I really couldn't take it. So I decided to run out of the classroom, and then I was like 16 at the time, and she went after me, and she told me, if I was okay, but she asked me, "Are you indigenous?" And I said, "What's indigenous?" I had no idea what she's talking about. So she began educating me, and so um, it intrigued me. So I went on to learn more on my own about myself and my ancestors ever since that day. And the rest is history, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many Chicanos, people who identify as Hispanic who grow up not really knowing much about the indigenous aspects of their history and their culture, just how much indigenous roots are embedded in everyday life of Chicanos, right? Mexicans, Mexican Americans. And much of that stems from, this legacy of colonialism. And it's really interesting to me because the story that you just told, I've heard this story by so many others. It's a very familiar story, and it seems that the erasure of indigenous identity among Chicanos and Mexicans, Mexican Americans, has been, I wouldn't say complete. Obviously, it's not complete, but it's been very, very effective, right?
Right.
Uh,
Right.
yeah, and there has been a type of renaissance that's taken place, I guess, since the Brown Power movement, the Chicano movement. Um, and how do you see this being played out today in 2024? I mean, you really can't hide the past any longer. There's so much information that's readily accessible,
Mhm.
right? And so how do you see things today here in contemporary life for Mexicans, for indigenous people south of the border who are just kind of reconnecting?
Well, I see it's positive. It does get tiresome, to be honest, but also there's just so much hope that we can't ignore. I mean, we also have the president, AMLO, who just left, is just about to leave, and he was responsible for. We got to give him the credit for reigniting that renaissance in Mexico. Well, he's one of the key people. He just, and a lot of people don't really look into it, but the reason he did all that, he inspired the people so much to embrace their native roots publicly. Many, on numerous occasions, he did this, and there's plenty of videos of him speaking about it. And it's because he is himself indigenous. He is a mixed indigenous person. However, though he has four grandparents like all of us, right? One of them is black, one of them is indigenous, and two of them are, I believe, Spanish. So, and he did talk about how he understood that 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 struggle his indigenous grandparent went through as a laborer. So I mean, it doesn't come from nowhere. He's doing it because he is also indigenous,
Yeah.
and so that there's that hope that he ignited in all the people, and the people are just very happy with him because he actually helped the people for once. He's not perfect. I mean, well, he's working within that colonial structure still a little bit, but or a lot, but the point is he did start the renaissance that we all needed, and he did do a lot of good things for the people so far.
Yeah, it seems like, and again, you can correct me if I'm wrong. It seems like there is like a something in Mexico, the nation state of Mexico, right, where they promote like the ancient indigenous roots, but it seems like they don't actively really talk about the indigenous issues that are taking place in Mexico currently and the struggles that so many indigenous people have, whether it's along the border or it's in South America. It's almost like there's been a suppression of indigenous rights, even though um, the overwhelming majority of people who are citizens of Mexico have some kind of indigenous ancestry. Is that, would you agree with that?
I agree, but again, it's like what I said. It's like this whole we gotta like ease into it because of how badly everything was suppressed. That identity was suppressed, but I think he did a good job despite trying to like plant that seed, and now people are really just taking it and running with it or walking with it.
Right.
It is. It's because of that. It's kind of like you can't just go in there and do it all overnight, kind of a thing. But like for instance, they do. He did want to naturalize water rights for everyone. He did set a plan in motion for returning power to the tribes in Mexico, which is barely coming out just now. These are developing right now. So he's really trying to before he leaves to like leaves his legacy. But I think I'm really excited about that he wants to return the rights to indigenous people so that if any outsiders want to, and we know they want to extract from the earth from native lands, they have to get approval from the native tribes first. This is the plan in Mexico right now. So those are just a few examples of the hope that I speak of when I say that there is something to look forward to and what keeps me motivated. Um, Either side of the border, we're going through the same kind of issues dealing with the colonizers. So we got the extractivism happening here too with the tribes, and it the same is going on below the border. So just to
Yeah.
connect our struggles there.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I mean, colonialism in the Western Hemisphere, it doesn't matter if it's Canada, the United States, Mexico, or any Latin American country, indigenous people have been struggling since the arrival of um, settlers, and that struggle continues even today. And many of the struggles are the same, especially the land issues. The land is everything. The land is a representation of the culture, and there's so much that capitalists and you know these corporations would love to get at. They'd love to get at the land and the resources, and I see the struggle over the land not being a Native American issue here in the United States or something that happens in the U.S. and Canada. This is an indigenous issue across the board, wherever indigenous people live. There's these really intense struggles with this colonial structure.
Right. And you see the silence going on both sides of the border towards our struggles. It's like really paralleled. But the difference being, I mean, with one difference is that Mexico is now a sovereign nation, so they have the ability to reclaim everything, all their sovereignty back. But I mean, obviously, that's going to take a while. I mean, we've already had sovereignty in Mexico since 1820. Um, After Mexican independence, when the native people they fought for the land and won against Spain, but after that, yeah, we won land back, but we didn't regain any sovereignty yet. It still was being ruled by Spaniards. Uh, and then now we just literally just got AMLO who started actually implementing something for the people. So it does take a. It's like land back is comes in phases. Sovereignty comes in phases. This is what I'm learning from our history, our experience, is that it's not going to just happen overnight. It's been taking a long time, even
Yeah.
after land back.
So you brought up a very important idea, landback. So I guess my question for you, maybe you can kind of explain just for yourself personally, what does that really mean? What does landback entail?
Well, just I think basically in a basic form, just when the native lands are returned to the native population, um, and it's not no longer being ruled by the colonist nation in Spain. For example, with us, Spain has relinquished rule in 1820 after Mexican independence, and that's when, not even at that time, later on, Mexico was officially created, um, officially, and that's just for me. That would be just the phase one, right, of land back. Then I would think land back comes in phases. We have to work for our sovereignty, which is going to be much more hard, more difficult. That's the phase that we're in. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, uh, the way
Be-
that you're explaining land back is pretty much what it says, giving the land back, right? Making sure that the land is rightfully in the hands of the people
right,
who have been there since time immemorial. And you really brought up an interesting point about sovereignty and how the first step is getting the land back to the hands of those who it belongs to rightfully. And then, of course, acting and behaving um, in a way that is reflective of sovereignty and autonomy, as opposed to just kind of repeating um, and I guess reinforcing these colonial structures. The colonial structures have to also fall, right?
right.
For land back to be effective.
And maybe I didn't finish my point, but the reason we need the sovereignty will take a much longer time. It's because of the occupation. The occupation is ongoing. Just because we got our land back doesn't mean that it's not occupied still. So that's what happened. As you can see, a lot can be learned from Mexico, because we have been colonized some 200 more years plus than the tribes in the U.S. and we're farther along in the process. So what we see is that with the sovereignty issue is that we still have the occupants there. We still have the colonists there. And not only were we just fighting them, but we're for rule of our own land still at times, most of the time. Uh, we also have to fight their perspectives that they have put on our people. We have to combat all this psychological warfare and break it down and dissolve it. And that's going to take time. And it's just very difficult while they're still there. And it's at any moment, I mean, we can still lose our land again, you know. These are very real uh, points, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I like what you had to say about not just dealing with right settler colonialism and its structures, but also the damage that's been done, the psychological damage and the colonized mindset that so many indigenous people have, or people who are reconnecting, who unfortunately, because of the legacy of colonialism, genocide, I mean, historical trauma, it's real and the consequences are real. Loss of language, loss of religion, really loss of culture. And I think that has impacted so many indigenous people of Mexico. Not everybody, obviously, because the indigenous communities there are very, very strong. And the languages are still strong in certain regions. But I know that there's just so many indigenous Mexican folks who are just now kind of coming out of that. And then they, of course, struggle because, they don't always get support from family members who are still kind of caught up in that colonial mindset, that colonial vortex.
Right. Yeah, you're right. You're right. And I get a little surprised about how much you kind of already know, and because seriously, nobody really pays attention to uh, to our side of the border.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I am, I'm a college professor, and, I work at um, we call it Hispanic serving institution. That term Hispanic is just another problematic term. And, the terms that we use, and I think are, um, a way to deny people their indigeneity, unfortunately. And then, of course, the status of indigenous people in the North, whether it's Canada, United States, is quite a bit different than the status of indigenous people south of the border. And I think that also creates some conflicts. But I've had, some amazing students who've come from certain parts of Mexico, and they speak their indigenous language. They have brought with them their customs, and their indigeneity is very, very strong. And then, of course, I work with a lot of Chicanos, uh, and they're just reconnecting. They're just now beginning to kind of rediscover their
Yeah,
indigeneity, and I'm like so supportive of that. And it's bothersome whenever I hear about how maybe their family members aren't quite as supportive, and how that decolonization of the mind can be really a process for a lot of people, and there isn't always support. And I think that's something that I always try to do um, for my Chicano brothers and sisters, supporting them on their journey of reconnecting.
I think that's really beautiful. Good to hear. Because there's a lot of they can run into a lot of negativity on social media, which is a problem because social media is where it's at, where all the youth flock to and go for a lot of their hours in their day goes to social media, right? So yeah, we need more positivity, and the family members are basically very Christianized or Catholicized. And unfortunately, I would compare it to something like how in the tribes in the US, they had gone through residential school systems. Well, in Mexico and Latin America, we have similar things. And um, they were called internados in the early days, and then it went through like phases. So there was internados, which was like the first residential schools in Latin America and in all of the continent. And then they became Indian schools, right? That's what they were called, Indian schools in Spanish, right? Escuelas para indios, los indios. And then they became, this one's gonna throw people off. I haven't really got around to talk about it, but I will in my TikTok. But this one, then so the next one they became was non-Indian schools. So that is this. There's a little loophole there, a little trick that they did with that. So it was erasure. It was indigenous erasure. So instead of being outright anti-indigenous anymore after Mexican independence, they were trying to again do that brainwashing. We're like, no, this is all your fault. We're equal now. If you can't make it, you pick up yourself by the bootstraps. No one's being racist to you. It's all in your head, right? So what they did was say, well, we can't call it Indian schools no more. We can't overtly do that to them no more. So what are we going to do? So they called them non-Indian schools, and that was the solution. But they were still
That's
Indian schools.
interesting. That's really, really fascinating. Yeah. I mean, there's just been an effort really since Hernan Cortez. Please correct me if I'm wrong on the history, but since Cortez, he lands in what we call Veracruz, right, in 1519. And from that moment onward, I mean, there's just been an attempt to completely destroy indigenous identity, indigenous culture, whether it's through Catholicism, through religion, through the encomienda system, which is like a type of slavery that indigenous people are forced into.
The
Yeah,
plantations.
the plantation, a feudal type system, and basically the appropriation of indigenous lands. And indigenous people of Mexico just did an incredible job of resisting and keeping the culture alive in certain areas, right? Especially like in southern Mexico and in certain towns and
Mhm.
that weren't colonized to the extent that say, the epicenter, which is Mexico City today, which at one time was this really beautiful, amazing city, right? The
Right.
city of Tenochtitlan, a city built on an island in middle of a lake, which is really incredible. I use my mind's eye and I think about this, some 250,000 indigenous peoples living on this island and then maybe a million people on the outskirts. It's just such an incredible idea, incredible thought, and all the innovation, the creativity, the art, the poetry that comes from what people term ancient Mexico. And then the attempt on the part of the Spanish to really completely crush that and suppress the not just the life ways, but also just to kind of erase from the consciousness any notion of indigeneity. Um, and like you said, it takes time for that to come back. But I do see some really positive things in the Chicano community here. Um, and I know the terms are confusing. I'm really curious too, just even using terms like Chicano and Latinx. I mean, a lot of these terms they're very confusing to people in the college university level. They're really pushing the term Latinx now, and I'm really curious. I know I just said a lot, and I hope you can kind of make sense out of what I said, but I am curious on what you think of some of these terms. And when somebody asks you your identity, like what do you tell them?
I know there's so many terms. There's like a handful. There's Hispanic, Latino. Right now we're in the Hispanic Latino Heritage Month.
Right.
Referred to as not Hispanic, not Latino Heritage Month. Um, yeah, those Hispanic and Latino, I understand that's how we're already accustomed to identifying. So, I mean, I'm not gonna get offended if someone tells me that. I know some people really do get offended, but I understand. You know, it's gonna take time to break to dissolve all this colonial mindsets. But I do not identify as Latino or Hispanic because those just are European, Eurocentric labels that lump us all into this Eurocentric identity. And really, it's just like a linguistic marker. It's not really an identity, it's just a European linguistic marker. So, and then it's our colonizers' marker. So, I mean, for that same reason, I don't identify as Latino Hispanic is the same reason I am not proud of my European colonial lineage the way that's how I refer to it as, because these are our colonizers who forced their language, their culture, and their lineage into us, our people, our native ancestors. So, I mean, I don't use them, but I don't fault anyone for using them. I try to educate people uh,
Yeah.
about them.
And I really I appreciate that because I feel like there's just so many people out there are very critical, right? Somebody uses a term that they don't like, and they
Huh?
become really, upset or negative, and it shouldn't be that way because there are people who don't know the history, they don't know the legacy of colonialism, they don't really know anything,
Right.
about their indigeneity, and you
Mhm.
can't fault people for the effectiveness of these colonial structures,
Mhm.
and it's our job to educate and to let people know um, that there's a complex history, a very complex history of indigeneity prior to 1492, and then, of course, is a very complex uh, settler colonial history that starts in 1492 that continues to this day in 2024. Um, and like you said, it is it Hispanic Heritage Month? Is that what they call it? Is that
Right.
yeah,
Hispanic Heritage or Latino Heritage Month.
yeah. And I have seen some really positive changes. I've noticed that there's a lot of discussion centered around uh, indigeneity in Mexico during this time. So I see that as a positive. And I know there's also a blending, right? I mean, Mexican culture is very complex, and there's so many people who relocated to Mexico from outside of that area, and it has obviously added to the cultural complexities, and those shouldn't be ignored as well. Nevertheless, how could anyone ignore the First Nations, right? How could anybody ignore the people who were there since time immemorial and all their incredible contributions
Right.
to the world, not just to indigenous people of Mexico, but to the entire world in terms of food and
All right.
yeah, the epicenter of knowledge in what they call ancient Mexico is just profound, and I think that's something that um, all indigenous people should be proud of, but certainly the people who come from what we call Mexico today.
You said it. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I respect that. Yes, because so much of the culture that we use today around the world comes from Mexico. It is Mexico and I believe is it French? There's another culture, but it's just two cultures that are like world renowned protected cultures because they are original cultures and they are a huge contribution to the world cultures, to everybody else's cultures. And we don't get that kind of credit or respect, or not that many people even know that that's a fact. I mean, so many things. I mean, we're talking about like everything that you would think of, like sodas, gum, popcorn, chips, even pizza from Oaxaca,
Chocolate,
chocolate,
vanilla,
just all the popular foods and drinks, tequila, mezcal, all kinds,
contributions to modern science and
science.
engineering
Oh,
and art and poetry. I mean, it
the
really is, it's endless, the
light bulb,
contributions.
the light bulb was made in, I believe, Zacatecas by a scientist there. And I'm drawing a blank on his name right now, but the credit went to, I believe, uh, Albert Einstein, right? Or
Um, I'm
Edison.
there you
Ed-
go, there you go. I was drawing a blank. Thank you for saving us
yeah,
there.
they, they to me, they kind of, never mind. But it was Alva Albert. What is his name? Alva Edison Alva something. But he was also from Mexico. So you see how he and it's like a hidden history that he was from Mexico. It's like a hush hush. But teachers there in Mexico will tell you that they were his teacher and can testify. So you see how he might have got the idea, stolen it from that scientist who originally was the first person to light up the street in Mexico with the bulbs. But birth control, other color TV. There, Mexico has always been like pretty advanced in when it comes to science and innovations and technology. So I mean, just the other day, I believe there was a new type of super rocket that they launched or something. But I have to look more into that to see if that was true. But it wouldn't surprise me. But yeah, there's so many contributions even to the pop culture, like cowboy culture. It is very popular. It's part of so many cultures that adapted, appropriated it, whether positive or just like without giving any credit or respect to Mexican people. It was done. It is done. It is what's done is done. But the list goes on, basically.
Yeah, the list does go on, and I don't even think most people have an inkling the contributions of indigenous Mexico and just how incredible those civilizations were. Uh, and
Yeah.
I think that sadly, because of settler colonial structures, the ancestors of these people, or the descendants, I mean, the descendants of these people know very little, and that to me, that's upsetting. That's problematic because that's just straight colonial indigenous erasure.
Yes.
And um, so, with yourself reconnecting as a teenager, kind of tell us what was that like? Like, did you just go all in trying to learn more about your indigenous roots, and maybe can talk a little bit about what you have found out about your indigeneity and what that process has been like?
Sure. Okay. Well, when I was younger and I started looking into there, of course, there isn't much resources for someone like me, for Mexican people. And also, we're not in Mexico, so we're very far away from our communities, our recent communities in Mexico. Uh, so there's obstacles with that I feel that a lot of people don't understand, especially on social media. But also, I think it's important for the tribes and for anyone to know that re-indigenizing, because I don't really use reconnecting because I've had a lot of bad experiences with that, with those toxic gatekeeper type of personality people. They were trying to use reconnecting as a way to say we're not connected at all and that we just need to be silent. Don't talk about anything. Don't talk about our history or anything. We don't have anything valid to say, basically, because they were labeling us as disconnected people. So me being always very resilient, uh, in all aspects of my life, really. I reject that concept. I don't believe for a second that we're disconnected. I feel like our ancestors are very spiritual people, and we have never stopped fighting for our land, for our culture, for our people. I mean, before any of these civil rights happened here in the US, Mexico already did a whole revolution over there and got their land back. And it's just a testament to show that we never were disconnected from anything or anyone or any place, our lands especially. We never were disconnected. So I say we're re indigenizing, we're remembering who we are. And well, there wasn't resources for me much, so I came on Instagram, and I don't think I was looking for that, but that's where I came across it. I came across the Chicano movement, who was already kind of defunct by then, but their work was still there being shared. So I started looking into that. Of course, the people that come before us, the leaders before us, are there still inspiring us all the time. So that's where I started learning a lot of things. Um, the work is still there for anyone to look into, the Chicano movement. And, I came across that not Latino, not Hispanic, and all these, and started learning. And it was very interesting. And I was, right away, I felt at home. I felt like these people understand me. And yeah, I became really upset when I started learning our history in great detail. and the pieces started coming together. And just the fact that um, our families go through so much. Our families are those farm workers. Our families are literal modern day slaves in the US, and nobody even touches that topic. Nobody even cares. It's just become normalized that we are supposed to be treated that way, and we're allowed, and we're and just it's normalized, right? And then in Mexico, our families are also struggling with extreme poverty to extreme poverty, even though the statistics in Mexico will tell you a biased false number like 45 to 50% in poverty. When you actually look at independent studies, it's more like 60 to 70%.
Mhm.
And we note this because those are our families. And we have to send money to our families in Mexico. And we use our privilege to help our families in Mexico. We don't move to the US and abandon them or anything. We don't move to the US and have all this great privilege for ourselves or anything like that. Would be nice, but our families work very hard for our family and then for our relatives in Mexico. So I mean, yeah, we don't got a lot of money, but we have to make it work and we have to spread it around. So just knowing everything that was, how I was raised, and everything that we went through, everything that I went through, everything that my ancestors went through, how like they had it much worse, and even I was raised in the barrios here in the United States, which wouldn't compare to what they had to go through in the plantations, obviously, with their um, hands being chopped off and whatnot, um, and not having enough to eat. But the barrios here in the U.S. are, they're just what you would compare it. You could compare it to. It's not the same, but like a reservation in the U.S. I mean, there's also black people there too, but for the most part, it's native people. It's us Mexicans, brown people.
It's brown people. Yeah.
Yeah, and
People
yeah,
yeah, I mean, I always tell people reservations, barrios, ghettos, I mean, it's pretty much all the same.
yes,
These are colonial, um, uh, colonized spaces. These are places
yeah,
where either indigenous people or, others that have been exploited, like African Americans, have, been placed to maintain some type of social control.
yes. And I don't exactly know what ghetto derives from, but I know what barrio derives from. Now that I've studied it, I just come to realize that barrio means like an indigenous dwelling, a dwelling for indigenous people. And so it's just a testament to how we did lose a lot of culture as Mexican people, as brown people, but here in 2024, we do bring some of that. We carry some of that with us till today. Like those terminologies, certain things, cultures, our food, our dances, our music, what we wear, how our hairstyles are coming back. You know, the norteños, the the corridos genres, they're sporting the Aztec haircut. They're also sporting the Edgar haircut. These are our indigenous hairstyles. Um, it's just some some indigenous traditions we did retain with us, and we are very proud of it. It's just Mexicans and brown people in general, we just kind of look at it as like a Latin culture. they,
Right,
they
right.
miscategorize it because they don't really know any better, and that has to do with Mexico. Um, that that brainwashing policy that I mentioned earlier, where they were like, "We're one people now, and this is our culture." Like all of us, like even though it wasn't there's the Spanish people's culture, they were like, "It's all of our culture now." Like yeah, like and they were like, they would appropriate it and change it and tweak it and do things to it So over time, after Mexican independence, it started becoming more like just different. They started changing it around. So that's why it caused a lot of confusion for our people. If you ask them where things come from and what does it represent, sometimes they don't know. So a lot of the time,
Yeah. Well, there's so much that you said that I find really interesting. I really like this idea of remembering as opposed to reconnecting. I'm gonna remember that. I like that a lot. And,
I appreciate it.
yeah, no, I really do. I like that perspective. Um, and yeah, I don't think you can, because of the legacy that we've been talking about of colonialism, you can't really blame anybody who, maybe doesn't have all the facts about what happened in the past because there was a concerted effort to destroy, the uniqueness of so many different indigenous communities. And I think it's important to note too that there isn't just one aspect of indigeneity or one type of indigeneity, that there's so much ethnic diversity, even within a place like Mexico, we call Mexico. But then that effort to create like a national culture that kind of further pushes people away from their original communities, and that has been very effective. And then you have the United States component to it as well, because when people come here, there is this attitude, you'd mentioned it earlier, about being somebody who has all the opportunities in the world and got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
Yeah.
Right, you gotta make your way. Whatever happened in the past, that's the past, and I think that mindset, it affects everybody. It doesn't matter if you're brown or you're black, it doesn't matter, YT people as well. I mean, obviously, that's the culture that was brought here, but it has affected everybody, and I think that's just, part of the system of control
Right.
that we're all living under.
I feel like it's a form of shaming, a shaming tactic to try to control you, so that you don't look into it more. You don't critically about, like, hey, I want my reparations. I want my land back. I want, you know, they just want you to forget about it and just move forward. Just assimilate. Basically, that's what they're saying when they say that.
Yeah, assimilation is very difficult to avoid, and it doesn't matter who you are. And I think that's the pressure that so many Americans feel. It doesn't even matter if you're indigenous or if you're somebody who arrives here from some other country. There's going to be this pressure to adopt the American value system, whatever that is. I don't even know, but there's that pressure to kind of leave behind whatever your history is, to not worry about your history because you're an American now, right?
Right.
And to be an American is to not be anything else, to not have any type of connection to your roots, whatever those may be. And I do see that as something that's changing. But then 2016, you saw the Trump movement and this rise of nationalism here in the United States, and this pushback against anybody who wants to be proud of who they are, be proud of their roots. And um, I I do see some really positive things, but it's almost like we're in a struggle right now where people like yourself are remembering and learning the history, but then we have others who, um, they despise multiculturalism. They despise the idea of people having any kind of connection to anything that isn't quote unquote American.
And that's that white supremacy mentality. That's what is really behind the American dream, illusion, nightmare. It's really just subtle white supremacy, just packaged in a. It's similar to how they did it in Mexico. It just, oh, we are just all one nationality now, and just leave. Yeah, like you said, put your cultures like second, or forget about it, or because you must have left because your country was no good, or not good enough like the US, and you want to be like us. It's just so weird. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I completely agree. I think there's just been this effort, and it probably has a lot to do with just our settler colonial history because the history is so ugly, it's so brutal. Our treatment of people of color, it has been so reprehensible here in the United States. And I think that um, it's
Hmm.
been this type of nightmare that I like how you put it, this nightmare that we have sold people, this American dream that you can come here, you can be anything and you can succeed. All you need to do is just pull yourself up by your bootstraps, work hard, and so on. And you know, the historical facts just completely negate that idea. And there's so many people here just struggling in this country. And you look at their skin color and they tend to be black and brown people. And there's a reason for that. I mean, there's a reason behind that. I mean, this has been a country made by and for white folks, right? So white supremacy. I know people when they think of that, they often think of something that happened, I don't know, during times of slavery. But the system that we're living under is a system of white supremacy, at least in my view. I don't know how you feel about that,
No,
but
I agree.
yeah, whether it's our education system or healthcare system, political system, yeah, I mean, you name it. It's a system that is centered around white supremacy.
Yes. There's not really much brown history in the books. Like, I never really understood my history because there really wasn't much of my history in any public school curriculums. I was learning about more about like people on the other side of the world, like the Jewish Holocaust, the, the Asian section, and then the black and white politics here. But there wasn't really nothing for like natives, and much less for brown people. Like, we're the ones with the least of anything. It's just like this they just really despise Mexican history and Mexican people. But we're just a footnote in the book, in the chapters, history chapters. But I was gonna say that, really, like, back to that American nightmare. I think we have to really put our heads together and try to create a movement of unity and educate the masses. Unity between natives, including Latinos and the tribes. And then we have to work to educate the masses on how the U.S. is and has always been in our backyards, in our countries, creating a nightmare for us, pushing us out of our lands in Latin America, and making us flee and seek asylum in the U.S. and then criminalize us there. So this in this sort of never-ending, uh, I would say, how there's a school to prison pipeline, but this would be like a displacement to ICE detention pipeline,
Yeah, no, I
stabilization to ICE detention pipeline that just goes in an endless circle.
yeah, I mean, I think there's this effort, especially among, again, using, a general term, Latinos, if we want to just like encompass, different groups
Yeah,
of folks who have come here from Latin America or people who've always been here. And what people don't realize is that indigenous people of Mexico have always been here in what we call the United States today.
yeah,
That's a historical fact. And these borders are just very recent, and there's indigenous communities along the border that have communities here in what we call the United States, and they have relatives, brothers and sisters, and aunties and uncles south of the border.
But
And yeah, and I think there's just this effort by the dominant culture to push people away from their original belief systems, customs. Um, but for whatever reason, among indigenous communities, not just here in the United States or south of the border, there's been that ongoing resistance, and just some of the things that you had mentioned about how the culture is still being played out, whether it's the music or it's the style of dress or even popular culture, the influences of popular culture. Uh, it says a lot about how these cultures that have been attacked and genocided for so many decades have persevered, and it still comes out in so many different ways, even among people who don't even know much about maybe the history. They're still practicing indigenous lifeways each and every day and may not even really know it.
yeah, and that's a good point. Like, I love making that point to people because it's like, first of all, if these people on social media like to tell us Mexicans you can't call yourself indigenous, well, when you really look at it, those people on social media, they are very disconnected sounding people. The way they behave in the first place, the way they treat us without any compassion and understanding. I could tell they're elderless or something's going on. But also the fact that if they knew anything, they'd know that even those Mexicans that aren't even aware of that they are indigenous are literally practicing more indigenous culture than they themselves. If you were to go visit them in Mexico, you would see that a lot of them make their indigenous food by hand. They make their tortillas, they make their tamales, they practice their cumbias is our native dance, our music. They do rituals, Dia de los Muertos. They do other rituals too, depending on which region they're in. They do their cowboy, which is what our indigenous ancestors created with the detribalized Mexicans together. And they're very proud of this culture. It's like they're super proud. And then, I mean, they do a lot of things that people don't really they the people on this side of the border would think it's just Mexican culture, but it's really actually our indigenous culture. So they might say you can't call yourself indigenous when really they're actually more. They practice more indigenous culture, you could say, than some of these tribes do. So it's not making any sense. It's just complete lack of knowledge. It's very ignorant. There's a lot of misconceptions on social media.
Yeah, I mean, there's one thing about, yeah, I know you're on TikTok and you have a lot of followers, and that's where I came across some of your work, um, and I'm on TikTok as well, and I do a lot of content. And one thing for sure, there can be a lot of negativity, and unfortunately, just a lot of confusion. And I think much of it stems from just a general lack of education on the part of a lot of people. And I always tell people it's okay, it's okay to not know about the history of people that you're not familiar with. But what's not okay is to speak on it and to
Actually,
do so in a way where you're, committing some type of lateral violence. And unfortunately, I see that a lot. And it's really, I find it to be really, really problematic. And it doesn't do us any good because we need that solidarity, and there's just so much that we have in common, our struggles, our way of life, and the issues that we deal with living in a settler society, the struggles that we have keeping our culture alive, and just being able to live in this world in a peaceful way. And that's not an easy thing to do. And I think it's better when we're not just organized among our own community, but we're organized um, internationally,
right.
because that would only make us stronger because the issues, whether it's indigenous issues here in the US or it's Canada or it's Hawaii, the state of Hawaii, or if you were to go to New Zealand, Aotearoa, or Australia or Mexico, the structure of settler colonialism is the same. And what people are experiencing in Mexico or what people are experiencing in New Zealand or Australia or the United States. And it behooves us to learn from one another and to see obviously how our own issues are unique to us, but also to see how our issues are all connected around the world. And that would only make us stronger.
Right. I agree with you. It's better for us to work together than push one another away. So I'm really thankful for this podcast. And like I was trying to say earlier, like even though we got land back, we still have a lot of work to do, obviously. And the only way I see out of this is if through unification from both sides of the border, because as I briefly mentioned, a lot of our issues with colonization today is dealing with, actually from Latin America, is dealing with the US, oddly. So even though we got land back, like I said, the occupation is still here. The occupation is still in Mexico, but it's also here in the US. And it doesn't matter if there's a colonial border there. Whatever the colonizers are doing here in the US, they're also crossing the border, jumping the border into Latin America, and they're making our lives miserable. So, if we work together, put our brains together, we can help one another really in an impactful way.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised that point, and I just want to echo that the politics that we see, whether it's international politics or it's politics right here in this country, whether it's the barrios, the reservations, poor communities, it's all the same. It's all about control. It's all about people maintaining their wealth and privilege through the exploitation of others, whether it's exploiting their land or exploiting what resources they have on the land, exploiting one's labor. Um, it's a system of control. It's a structure that is affecting people all over, and it behooves us all to at least have some kind of solidarity and to recognize that, um, and also to see how we can work together. If anything, at the very least, be supportive of one another in our efforts, in our decolonial efforts, as opposed to pushing people away,
Yeah,
which is not cool.
mm, that would be a great start, is to be supportive of one another while some of us are literally just waking up and re-indigenizing and remembering who we are. You know, we just have to have that love and compassion for one another and patience. And then, because you can't tell people, oh, you can't tell people, okay, one thing is like I've heard them say, you don't want to learn, you don't want to be indigenous. All you want to be is Mexican. You just want to be Latino. But then you also say, don't take up indigenous space. Don't come here. Don't go there. Don't pretend to be indigenous. Because how are we supposed to learn if you're shutting the door on us? How are we supposed to, you know? So it doesn't make, it's contradictions like that that are really, really not useful to anybody. Um, that are, like you say, behooving.
Yeah, I mean, love, compassion, support. That's the best of what we have to offer in terms of our values and our belief systems, and maybe uh, we forgot a little bit of that, or maybe some people have forgot
Some
that.
people,
That's yeah,
not everybody.
not definitely not everybody. Because there are, there are a lot of, uh, people are very supportive of those who are, remembering their culture and wanting to get in touch with their culture, and
Yeah, there's a lot
there
of good people out there.
yeah, and there should be a lifeline. There should be a lifeline thrown to for those individuals as opposed to pushing them away. But I understand why. That colonial mindset, unfortunately, is very effective, and the negativity and the ugliness that you see sometimes on social media can really overshadow the positives. And I think that's why these discussions are important to have. Is that we can dialogue and talk about something in a constructive way, and those are the things that I'm really interested in. Uh, for me, I don't argue with anybody on TikTok. If somebody doesn't like my material, it's like whatever my content. It's like that's fine. I've had people try to do wars with me, and I'm like, you win. But
And
I know for you the topics that you do, it can be really hard. And so how do you do it when you have people like coming at you? Because I know me, for me, I mean, I'm just like I can't. It's really hard for me to engage negativity. And I'm not saying that you are, but I'm saying that just like having people come at you in a not so nice way, it's not cool, first of all, and
yeah,
it could dissuade people from talking about these issues, but you stick with it.
I've always been, since I was little, my mom, she tried to take me to church, and I was like, I'm not going. I don't believe in that. Ever since I was a kid, and she endlessly tried, and I ended up baptizing just to please her. And I told her, well, I'm just doing it just to please you. I'm not. I don't. That's it. But she knows. Like when I told her that I started decolonizing, and what asked her about it, and asked her what she knew about it and everything, and told her how I feel about it, how I'm so angry, and she knew. She was like, you always were that way. You just, it's just in me. It's my ancestors. It's my lineage. I do come from a tribe that I come from the people, the Koras, which are they, and the Shishimekas, and these are the tribes, not the only, but out of like a handful or so that either were not defeated in war, or the Kora ones were the ones who kept resisting 200 years after everyone else was already assimilated. They were just really stubborn. Like we will not budge. So they ended up going to the mountains really far away, and um, so I think that's where I get it from. There's no other explanation other than that resistance that's built in me. But so when they come at me like that, I'm just like, calm down. I'm just like, calm down, don't react. I'm just like, slow down, because it's very, you can do impulsive reactions, or but we don't want that. We want cool and calculated responses. So based off what I already know, and then whatever I need to look research further, I'll do that. And then I'll just practice it a little and be like, which approach do I want to take? Because sometimes I will be very cutthroat, I'll be very mean, perceived in their eyes at least. But and then other times I'll just play nice, or just kind of like let it roll off, like kind of more gentle, right? More friendly. But it just depends what I'm feeling, and sometimes it's good to do the one that's controversial, the one that's high energy, the one that's cutthroat, because those are the ones that go viral. In my experience, they go viral.
Yeah, and the topics you talk about are important. I mean, the border issues that so many are faced with, and the discrimination, the prejudice, the racism, the colonial violence that's currently taking place among
Mhm.
so many brown communities along the border and here in the United States as well. I mean, it's just it's horrific,
Yeah,
and you speak to those topics.
yeah.
Uh,
Because there's an uptick. There's a rising in attacks on brown people, racial attacks, and uh, death, and well, people losing their lives in attacks, racial attacks. The street vendors, we have police brutality, of course, which is at the same level as the black community or more so with the numbers coming out. And it would make sense because of all of the racial propaganda on the news towards our community, our brown community. And all, if you count, include those who lost their lives at the border trying to seek asylum and flee colonial violence that the U.S. perpetuates, um, there's thousands of lives being lost annually uh, in this, just alone in this U.S. border apartheid. And then you got the farm workers, which hundreds of them die per year. And that's not including our MMIWs at the borders and in Mexico. Like, so it is a huge ongoing genocide, and I'm just trying my best to hold it together and to keep going and just never give up and keep creating awareness. And I like TikTok because, well, it's just such a great platform to reach the masses and educate. And if you do a little recipe that works, then you can reach a lot of people that way.
Yeah. No, absolutely 100%. Totally agree. And maybe that's a good place for us to kind of start to close up our discussion. Why don't you tell us how we can find you on TikTok and on Instagram as well?
Sure. Well, it's the same for me on Instagram and TikTok. It's Kuali.indigenous. It's Kuali dot indigenous, Indigenous. I also have a YouTube, but I'm just starting that. So um, for now, TikTok and Instagram. And yeah, it's been a pleasure. It's been great conversating with you and sharing knowledge with each other. And I hope we can do this again sometime.
Yeah, I would really like to. And also, I'd be remiss to not mention that you are also involved in filmmaking as well, which I think is super cool because I've always been kind of fascinated by movie making, documentary making, and I even kind of do that style when I tell my stories, right? I try to turn them into little mini documentaries.
I
And so,
forgot to mention how much of a fan I am of your videos on TikTok. They're very inspiring. They're so good visually and everything. They're nice.
thank you. I really appreciate that. Coming from you, that means a lot. Uh, so with your filmmaking, tell us a little can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I know that's something that you're currently working on and, maybe your inspiration behind that and where you wanna take it.
Yeah, sure. I've always really been into films and I guess and art, those kind of things. Um, I just love the whole thing about film where you can just put everything you love into it, like music, fashion, anything you want to put in there. Um, all your creativity, right? And then also when I came into my activist role, then I realized that I can merge those worlds together and use it to really platform us further, our communities, and get that awareness that we really need. I mean, it's no secret that the native people and the brown native people, we don't really get the Hollywood representation that we should. If it was measured in terms of our creativity and our talent and our capability, it's just not where we should be. We're very discriminated in that sense too. So I recently joined Chicano Hollywood, and we are just making our own Hollywood since we're not invited. so we didn't get the invite. So we're just doing our own Hollywood. Um,
I really love that. And now with the technology, it just seems that there's just so much that's accessible to us that we can make our own films. I can do
can
our
do
own.
our own films.
Yeah, we can do this ourselves. And I know that, Hollywood obviously has the big budgets and they have all the money and they have endless supply of resources, but there's so much that you can do with a pretty decent camera and some mics and with a good story,
Mhm.
right? And that's the thing that you have is that you have really great stories and you have a passion to educate people. And if you have that passion to educate people, love for your community, love for your culture, and you combine that with filmmaking, you can really do something pretty special with that.
And you have great stories as well. So maybe someday we have to collaborate.
Yeah, no, I would be that would be pretty cool. I love filmmaking, always have. I took a just to tell you a little bit about just my background. I was in grad school years ago at the University of Oregon, and I took a multimedia class, and I did a mini documentary. It was like 10 minutes long, maybe less than that, on a basket weaver, a Walla Walla basket weaver. His name is Joseph Lavador, and I just fell in love with filmmaking, and I got so caught up in my education, I got so caught up in my own research as a graduate student, and then of course my work as a college professor. I kind of drifted away from that, but it's something that I've been trying to get back into, and I just I love either telling stories or putting the camera in front of somebody else who's a really good storyteller like yourself and just letting you tell the story. And so, yeah, if you want to come back and do this again, we could tell some more stories and dialogue a little bit more. That would be really cool.
Yeah, we could talk about some stories next time.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I hope you really continue to pursue your filmmaking career. And I think that there's just so many people out there who'd be really interested and just learning using that kind of platform, filmmaking as a tool. And I just think you could just educate so many people with that. And the nice thing about it is we don't need Hollywood anymore.
We don't need them.
Exactly, exactly. So, well, I just want to say thank you again for agreeing to do this. I know I came out of nowhere with my invite, and I'm really glad that you accepted to podcast with me. Is there anything you'd like to add before we end the show?
Um, no, I'm just, yeah, I'm really happy we did this. And no, not at all. I'm glad that you invited me and you just randomly did it. I'm really happy you did.
Yeah, well, like I said, I have been following you on TikTok, and then I caught you on IG, and I was like, oh, she's on IG as well. And then one of your posts came up, and I was like, well, I'll just see if she'd be interested. So I'm glad we made this happen. If you're interested in doing it again, I would love to talk some more. And obviously, I'm going to be on the lookout for what you have coming in the future. And I'm hoping the best for your YouTube channel. I think YouTube is something I'm trying to focus on a little bit more. We're actually live here on YouTube. This is going to be posted onto YouTube immediately after our discussion. So, you'll be able to share that as well with the masses, with all your followers. So,
Followers.
well, I appreciate it so much. I'm just going to ask that you stay on the line so that way we can talk off camera for a second. All
Sure.
right, y'all. This is Dr. B. I appreciate y'all from tuning in. Quali, I appreciate you.